Da 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 da. What's my good cheer? Welcome, everybody. Let's give YouTube a couple of minutes, get those notifications out, let people know I've gone live. And if you're up at this time of night, welcome. It is close to bedtime. I would like to keep it light tonight, if at all possible, right? This has been a really off week. And maybe not so much off, but different. And I thought maybe, coming into my live before I pick a card tonight, I'd talk a little bit about change. I think I have that experience in my life, that evidence that it makes me a little bit of an expert when it comes to change, especially in my own life. I'm somebody who has experienced change since I was a little child, right? Even going to school, I went to so many elementary schools growing up. I only went to two high schools, but oh my goodness, I went over 10 elementary schools going up. I think it was 11 elementary schools. Every time I went into a new school, I wasn't afraid to try new schools because I never settled well in any school. And so when my dad would pick us up and say, we're heading off and we're going somewhere else, I would take that as an opportunity to do a little bit better than I did in the previous school. Maybe make new friends, make better friends, make any kind of friends. It took me, oh my goodness, years and years, to be able to get close enough to people to let them, I don't know, um, become friends. I always wanted friends my entire life, but being a little bit dynamic and coming from a dynamic family and moving so much, it was very painful, you know, coming into a school class in the middle of the year. And sometimes I'd be doing that twice in a year and coming into a class and with the excitement and the anticipation that maybe I can do a little bit better from the school that I was just coming from, that maybe in that bad experience that I learned something in that, and that I thought that I could adjust and do a little bit better and maybe make some friends. Oh my goodness, that really wasn't the case. Being an adult and putting myself in those shoes in the child that I was. Oh my goodness, I wouldn't wish that on anybody. But I was a very hopeful kid. And if you ask anybody, I was a very optimistic kid. And if you asked anybody I know, you'd probably say I didn't really have anything to be optimistic about, but it was a love for life. And it was that kind of toughness that I had about myself that, okay, maybe the kids wouldn't like me. Maybe I wouldn't be able to settle emotionally. My system wouldn't be calm at home. But still, I had that right. I was a human being. I was created. And in that creation, right, I had every right to make the best life for myself as I possibly could. I had lots of issues growing up, but coming from that dynamic family, even though I was so different from the other members in that family, I wasn't the only one who was struggling. I was the only one, though, that just kind of recognized and admitted that I was struggling. Every member in my family had issues. And the thing is, you know, I understand about epigenetics, and I really do believe in epigenetics because, in going back in my own family's history, these issues were just inherited. They were just customs and traditions, and they were just passed down from one generation to another. And even though some of those problems may have looked a little bit different, it was in the different experiences that we each had in that family that created the human beings that we were. I was an optimistic kid. I was going to create the best life that I possibly could, despite what anybody thought of me, despite whatever circumstances I was in. And I don't know how, but I recognize that I came from a pretty kinked up family. I recognized it right off the hop. And maybe it was only in that association and in that being a spectator of the other children in the neighborhood and their relationships with their families, that maybe I recognized something in that. Maybe it was what made me so optimistic that I could create something for myself in the end. I do believe, I'm not saying in the end because I'm not even close to being at the end, but at 63 years old, I have built up some experience, some serious experience when it comes to change. I was trying to bring myself out of heavy lessons. I shouldn't be doing lessons this late at night. And I had a heavy head and I wanted to come in and be all optimistic and cheery and but genuine in that, because if I came in, I could smile, I could chameleon and be whatever person I want, but I tell you, for the people that I want to connect with, the people that I really believe that could be served by some of these stories that I tell or some of these experiences that I have, that you guys would pick it up right away. So, what I was doing is I have a little book here and it's full of pictures, and I was just going through some of these pictures, and it's what gave me the idea, before we picked a card, just to kind of talk about change for a couple of minutes. And I just looked at these pictures and I went, oh my goodness, even as an adult, physically, emotionally, mentally, just like when I was a kid, I was chameleoning. Is that the word? Changing constantly. But in changing, I found that genuineness even then. I always kept it genuine in my experience. I wanted people to love me and like me for who I was. I'm always changing. Even in this moment, I am changing. Even in this past week, oh my goodness, with the understandings and with the experiences that I'm trying to create for myself, just change, change, change. And of course, these experiences that I had in thinking a little bit about the span of life, the beginning of life, the end of life, and the renewal of life. If you've been hanging out with me for any length of time, you would know I don't think Cindy is not coming back, but there are parts of me that are coming back. And, you know, what kind of life at the end of the existence that I have, could I look at my life backwards and say, what was the best gift that I could have given myself? Right? And it would have been to make sure that, those other parts of me that are coming back, right, the next time around, that in whatever human that they're joining and partnering with, that they have a better recognition of those other parts of them. I woke up to some of these ideas, some of these realizations so late in my life. And I'm treading water, and in the first, it was all about the building of my brand and sorting myself out emotionally and mentally and physically, right? And I felt I had to do that. And I changed in that process. But when I was changing again, I was keeping it genuine. I was always those other parts of me at the very least. That never changed. So, in partnering with myself, I just kind of rode those waves. I adapted and conquered. I accepted a lot of situations. I accepted a lot about myself. But at the same time, I made a lot of realizations too. I think, when I was born, I was like one of those trail cams, right? That whoever or whatever knew something was kinked in my family, that something wasn't working the way it was supposed to be working. And through my experience, right, those other parts of me, right, kind of got an idea as a spectator and as an experiencer and being genuine. I would have to say a truth teller in that, that some movement was made. Some movement was made. Now, right, I thought we're just all going to move forward. We got our lessons, right? We're not going to do that anymore. Things are going to be so much better down the road. Again, not realizing and not recognizing that as much as I was having my experience, each member of my family, who was most likely part of a larger group, were having their own experiences. And so I kind of took it on as my mission, right? Being that experiencer, having so much change come into my life and not wanting to ever go through those experiences ever again, right? It wouldn't have been exactly the same because it is in those traditions and cultures. They call it nurture versus nature, right? That I might wake up in another country or, right? That I would have different personalities and yet maybe the same souls joining forces, if that makes any sense to anybody out there, right? That I'm traveling with my family. This is evolution, right? This is why whoever, whatever said, oh my goodness, something's going on, right? We're going to turn Cindy into that trail cam and we're going to figure out what's going on and then have that opportunity to wake up and tread some water and really recognize where I went wrong, where my family went wrong, and all those other characters, right, that traveled the same path, right? Traveled the same path. They might not have been directly impacted by my direct family, but most definitely we were all traveling for a little while. And so I went back into my pictures. This is what I'm thinking today. And this is kind of heavy stuff. So I got to kind of say it because you guys would recognize the heaviness in my conversation tonight. So I'm just going to just lay that on the table already. That's what was on my mind. It's not like it's been the first time, right? This has been a topic that's been off and on for a very long time now. But when it comes to change, I have changed so much in the past 6 years. I mean, so much just in the aspect of spending so much time by myself. That is something very new in my life. As much as I enjoyed my time by myself, never got much time by myself. because, I had that role within my family, probably had that role within my own friends. But also, I have to recognize I am so grateful for every one of those experiences because it created, right? The best Cindy that I could be in this moment, understanding that change is always happening in the Cindy that I am in this moment is probably not going to be the Cindy that even when I come home from my trip, right, in September, they always change me, always. And I don't always know the movement I'm going to make when I get home, but I understand that it is going to impact me and I'm going to feed on that for the year. I'm going to set some goals and I'm going to, right, move into new experiences. I've already been like stirring them around. But a lot of people wouldn't recognize, who I am now because you might just be coming into some of these live shows that I'm doing now, maybe even just recently. And this is the first time you're ever meeting me, right? So I pulled a few of these pictures. I could pull more. I could go all the way down to my childhood here, right? But I thought just pull out a few, and I just closed my eyes and I grabbed a few pictures, and okay, I looked at them and oh my goodness, okay, yeah, these all work, right? Because they all represent change, change in the way I look, change in the people that I surrounded myself with, change. Well, the change is the way I felt about myself, the way I was able to connect with other people. And it's something I've always been able to do because it's something I've always wanted to do, right? After a while, you just don't care anymore about what people think about you. You're just going to be you, right? And I could chameleon just as easily, maybe even more easily than a lot of people out there. But because I'm so determined to be genuine in what I do, right, it would come off as a lie. That's something that, right, I have a little bit of aversion to, especially in the past half a dozen years or so, that, it's not something that I want to have attached to my life. So, in talking a little bit about change today, I just thought I would show you a few pictures and just maybe there'll be a little something I can just see right now. This was a very happy time in my life. Can you imagine? Look at me there. I was 311 pounds. 311 pounds. And I would have to say, that was the happiest time in my entire life. I loved these guys. That's my friend Steven and my friend Brian. They're not in my life anymore. Steven joined Circus Soleil and traveled the world. My friend Brian, well, he moved on in his life and he's passed now. But I loved them to death. And, I would say for a half a dozen years, we were tight. We had so much fun together and they accepted me for who I was. I mean, you could just look at that picture and you can see how much they loved me. You can also see they were big partiers. They loved the concerts, right? They were into the heavy metal like White Snake and Metallica and right. I went to all those concerts. I'm not a big music person, but I liked my guys. My guys liked that music. So, right? But at that time, right, maybe that wasn't a very genuine thing to do, right? But because I wanted to hang out with them, and I probably expressed to them too that they knew I was all about Barbara Streisand and Bay City Rollers and the Bee Gees, right? It's really a big far fetched span in between Metallica and White Snake and Nirvana and all of them, right? But what a great time we had. That was a time. when I really was a part of a group. I had some close friends by then. I had managed to be able to connect with people in my early 20s, but to be a part of a large group. And this large group were, for the most part, all empaths. All of us, every single one of us, so alike, coming from different families, right? Uh, alcohol, alcoholism, abuse, uh, different aspects, different, right? But this is what builds and creates empaths are these very dynamic. I call them dynamic. It's just the lightest way that I can do it, right? These dynamic experiences that do change us, right? And in this group, oh my goodness, we accepted each other, we held each other up, we loved on each other, and we had so much fun. I would have to say that was one of the best times in my life being a part of that group. I think I was actually the queen bee in that group, me and Brian. Right, we started that group, and then just everybody just kind of showed up, and oh my goodness, we'd go camping. Here, I think I even found a camping picture. Oh no, I didn't. Okay. We go camping and to concerts and oh my goodness, house parties usually at my place, but tons of house parties every week, maybe numerous times a week, but so much fun. Then I lost some weight, and there's not a very good picture of that, but that's me sitting in the flowers. Sitting in the flowers. Yeah, I lost a bit of weight, and I was very uncomfortable around men. I was not used to getting, right? I had lots of men in my life, but friends, right? Not lovers, not guys who were chasing me down and wanted to date me and stuff. And when I lost that weight, I became very, very uncomfortable with that. That change was something that was really kind of off-putting to myself. And I reveled a little bit. That's what was so confusing. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times because I was really uncomfortable with it. But at the same time, I was getting into beautiful clothes. I was getting attention, and as a teenager and as a young adult, I just lived vicariously through my friends' relationships, right? But then I met my husband, and this is my husband, Stu, here. We were together for 8 years. He was in the military, and this man had such a heart. He was also an empath. He was also probably very woke. Now that I'm putting my self in my own shoes at that time, because I wasn't woke at that time. That right? I was so positive and I was so happy and I was so in love and I was so lucky I had snagged on to somebody who treated me so well and who loved me so much. But again, in never having those relationships, right, because I just needed to get married because, right, I was just not comfortable with all this attention, right? And so we got married, but I wasn't comfortable in being a wife, right? I was still, even though on the outside, right, that I may have been attractive, but on the inside, I was still that 311-pound woman, and I had a lot of limiting beliefs, and in that nurturing that sticks with you your entire life unless you do a little bit of work, and which is what I've been doing the past half a dozen years, is treading that water, putting myself in my own shoes, putting myself in my family's shoes, my friends' shoes, and really delving in to see where I got it wrong, but also where I got it right, because I got a lot of it right too. Otherwise, I wouldn't be sitting here right now. Um, then my husband changed. He was in the military and he did some tours and he got post traumatic stress disorder. And I didn't understand that. My marriage was falling apart. By then, I was coping as a gambling addict. I was playing video lottery terminals and poker stars, and I was gambling. And it was one of the same problems that my father had, was in that compulsive gambling, and it's probably why I got sucked in so hard, because I love my dad so much. If he could do it, right, it would be okay for me to do it too. And I blew so much money on that. And by that time, I was working bars and nightclubs, and I was working and making so much money, and my husband was making so much money. And oh my goodness, we just went our separate ways in that. And I went negative, right? Putting myself in that situation, in my shoes and in my husband's shoes, in that work that I've done. I recognized I went negative in that, and slowly I gained some weight back. Right? Me and my husband were not spending time together, not arguing and fighting and being angry with each other. That was should have been a big signal to me that we weren't communicating well. Now, we should never have been having big blowouts or anything, but we should have been able to be ticked with each other and been able to express being ticked with each other, sort those things out. Maybe, right? We could have helped each other in that, but I wasn't woke to any of those ideas. We split up, and again, I went through some more change, right? And my husband did too. You can just see the difference between the two. After he came back from his tours, he just wanted to be a Hell's Angels. He became a striker for the Nomads, and right, and he changed so much. I'd come home from work and my backyard would be full of bikers partying and building bonfires in the backyard. I didn't even have a fire pit, right? And I had changed too. I had changed in that too, looking for that way that I could, hmm, I don't know, change myself into somebody that maybe would save the marriage in that. It didn't do us any good. And on top of that, it took us over 10 years to finally break away from our relationship after we had split up. We were together for 8 years in that. I don't have any more pictures than that, but I'll tell you, in that change, I crashed, right? I crashed and I put a lot of weight on. My negative attitude was so bad. I relied on my addiction for gambling, and I'm so grateful. I have not touched anything, not even lottery tickets, or BLTs. I don't even play poker stars. Nothing. I won't even go. I bet you. I wouldn't even do that, right? My building does 50-50 draws, right? At the end of every month, try and draw money off of everybody's pensions, right? I won't even do that. But like today was the day that they were doing, I would just donate a few. And they say, how many tickets? No, I don't want it. It's just a donation because I don't gamble anymore. I'm so grateful for the lesson, so grateful that I put in the work. And that's what it is. I put in the work. And in putting in the work, I changed, because I destroyed that marriage, right? It was just the fact that I had gone negative in that. And we know when we leave ourselves open to that negative, the only thing that can come in is more negative. And it's hard to dig yourself out of that hole, right? Because I had a lot of people around me who were also in that hole. And, right, we were just supporting each other in our miserablenesses. Still changing, you guys, and the thing is, I have a few lessons on my belt and it served me so well, but I look out into the world and I just see all these amazing people who are struggling in their addictions, struggling in their own limiting beliefs, in their own negativity, right? And, I try to be that cheerleader, and right? That motivator, and full of inspiration. But I'm doing that for myself too, right? And this is what I serve to my brand is that experience that I'm going through in my whole life from the beginning of my life, right? And I'll be here when I'm 80, 90 years old, right? Goal setting, right? My affirmations, 114 years old. That's what I'm going for because I understand innovation and because of my good health. And that's something I'm just going to say I'm grateful for because, everybody in my family, everybody, my mom, my dad, my sisters, they all struggle with stuff. And in this day and age where, your doctors are buddies with the pharmacists and, they're just writing out prescriptions just like this, I'm so grateful to have my good health at this age, not to suffer with the chronic illnesses and the aches and pains or the more serious issues that are also right because 75% of serious illnesses are brought about by stress, right? And to be able to manage my stress, and there was a lot of it, and a lot, I think, of my issues was the fact that I was self sabotaging myself, and I spent my entire 30s at the very least and 40s just problem solving, right? How am I going to pay the bills? How am I going to explain to my husband? How am I going to get myself out of this one, right? What am I going to do next, right? Can end up homeless. Oh my goodness. I was the worst instigator. But like I said, so many people out there that I know, and even, I don't even have to know them. I just know them in seeing them, in being the experiencer. And I say that was me, right? Epigenetically, they've gone through the exact same thing. Maybe different limiting beliefs, maybe different addictions, right? Coping mechanisms that, but it's the exact same thing. And it's a big part of the population. We can just see it, everywhere's all these beautiful souls, right? Wanting to help. And they're just saying, I'm coming in anyway. And they're coming into heroin addicts and fentanyl addicts and alcoholics and gamblers and people who are in really bad coping mechanisms because there's a lot worse than that. And yet they come in thinking that they can just get to work and they just crash in that, right? And I easily could have been one of those. And so again, I'm going to have to say my gratefuls because, right, I know how important change is. We don't always change for the better. We know that, right? But if we can find a way to take a look at our lives, take a look at where we are now, maybe take a look at where we were, and miracle and miracles, be able to put yourself in your own shoes, in different periods of your own life and look at your life and look at the people in your life, that you would recognize that, you're carrying a lot of stuff that was there already, right? That you weren't your worst enemy, that you were surviving the very best way that you possibly could. You were riding the waves, you were adapting and conquering, you were learning about resilience, you were finding a way, right? You were surviving and you were, right, taking care of yourself, right, the very best way that you possibly could, because you might not have, right? You could have made a different choice and you could have not been here, right? It is in the light and the darknesses, and the darknesses touching the light for the very first time. That's the majority in this world right now that we've created. That's a big majority. That's a big target audience, right? And we need more people to be genuine and honest and be the example, not just in their successes, but in their failures, right? In those things that we chameleon and we pretend that everything is okay, that we got our poop together, right? That we got a handle on it, that if we were a little bit more honest in explaining, and being honest in our weakest points, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times, it was the best of times, oh, it was the worst of times, right? It was the best. It was the best of times, and it was the worst of times. And this is what we have to realize about life, right? Life is only expecting us to create the best life for ourselves as we possibly can, right? And I could have easily have not woken up to any of these ideas, and I would have continued to change, and I would have continued to create the best human being I possibly could. I might not have worded it that way. I probably would have worried about, despite what anybody says, despite my circumstances, despite what I look like, despite that I'm not smart enough, despite, I am going to make the best life for myself. I have every right to make the best life for myself as I possibly can, and I'm going to do that, right? Maybe that's why I was invited to the party, because maybe I had a few lessons under my belt even before I realized that there were lessons to be had. And that's the truth. Okay, you guys, we're just going to pull a card for a couple of minutes. I just want to talk about change. I might title this podcast tonight Change. It's just one perspective about change. There are many perspectives about change, and I've vocalized them myself. I've realized them myself. But right, there are so many aspects of that topic of change that we can look at. But I would thought, if we can look at it in a way where we could maybe do ourselves a little bit good, right? That maybe in being the evidence that it could be done, that somebody who's also a spectator, somebody else who might be that trail cam for whoever or whatever, we'll see that we are really trying, right? Might be a little bit kinked, a little bit broken, a little bit scared. But despite all that, we are riding the waves. We're adapting and conquering. We're finding a way. And we're not crying over spilt milk. We're just picking ourselves up, brushing off our knees, and we're just going to try again, right? Just going to try again. Okay, you guys, let's just pick a card here. Just go into it for a couple of minutes. I'm calling it a night. I made my sister, I prepped all the ingredients. I'm making her a corn chowder uh, for her dinner tomorrow. So I'll be going over to see my sister tomorrow. I might go for a swim. We've been meaning to get together all week, but right, not my choice, but she's been putting it off. But you know what? You honor that, right? And I have my own thing. I'm doing my own thing. I've got a trip that I'm planning. It's going to be absolutely amazing. I'm so excited. Very odd, though. Uh, a story for another day. Then when I'm just gonna decide what I'm gonna do about it. But yeah, something I noticed a little bit about my campsite in one of the parks that I'm going to. So I thought it was pretty odd. But yeah, I just found out, so I'm just gonna munch on it for a little bit myself before I, or if I mention it to anybody else. Okay, let's just take this card because it's sticking out. There's a good one. I haven't pulled that card yet. 54 powerful words. I've never pulled that card. Grace swoops in to make the impossible possible, right? A lot of people, grace are those miracles, Um, lots of people, they use the word hope, right? For me, hope is kind of like sitting there and going, oh, please, please, please help me. And we know quite often, right, that we have to be our own saviors in that. But the thing is, we don't always know how to go about it, right? But I don't think we're really expected to have those answers all the time. But we are expected to move towards it, right? In that you get what you give. And I look at it as optimism, right? I don't usually use the word hope, right? Because again, it just seems so much like begging. It just seems so much like sitting on my haunches and waiting for something to swoop in and save the day. But it's just kind of moving towards that. And I recognize even in my own life, if I move towards something like I'm doing this trip in September, that I'm just, it's just everything's just kind of falling into place. Like this wasn't happening a week ago, and yet in this moment I can say in 2 weeks I'm going on my yearly trip, a trip that I haven't missed in at least 25, 30 years that I've, right, ever since my marriage fell apart. I just went straight back to Mother Nature. It started the healing process for me, even though I didn't at the time realize it, right? I realize it now, right? It's better late than never. Okay, but back to this word grace. Grace swoops in, right? To make the impossible possible. That trip, it was impossible. I had no hopes that it was hopes. I don't like to use that word. I had not one optimistic point about me that would think that that trip was going to happen, with my sister being in the hospital, right? Not having a job putting over my head, right? Having to dip into the kitty that I had worked so hard to save so that I could get some of those goals on my goal list done. And again, right? My teeth, I needed dental, and I had budgeted $650 to get the dental done. I have no insurance, right? And then the government comes up with insurance for low incomes, and I got $2,500 worth of work done. $2,500. Where would I have come up with that? Right? But grace swooped in to make that impossible possible. Just like grace swooped in to make my trip happen. And that only happened because I moved towards that. That was a goal. That was a dream. That was the plan. And I just didn't sit on my haunches and go, oh, the trip is going to happen, right? Something's going to swoop in and, right, just make it happen. No, I had to move towards that. And as long as I moved toward, I didn't have to meet it halfway, right? I didn't even, not even a fraction of a way. But I just started making those plans and I just started moving towards that and something just came up behind me and just, and now we're going on that trip, right? Grace. That's a good one. I haven't had that card yet. It's really neat because there are a lot of miracles that come into my life that way. I I don't look at them so much as miracles. I recognize what that they are, right? But I kind of like, oh, isn't that odd? Ooh, that's a serendipity. That's a breadcrumb, right? But I don't look at it as grace, and I should more often. It's just because I haven't pulled that word, it hasn't been top of mind. Now that I've pulled that word, maybe I'll use that word more often, right? Especially in my gratefulnesses, because lots of times I have no idea in the direction I'm going. I have no idea what the content of conversation is going to be when I come into my podcast. That I just kind of, and it just kind of flows out of me. And that's a grace itself because I could just be coming in here and going, oh my goodness, and just flubbering over myself and talking silly stuff. And I talk about silly stuff too. But that's part of me. That's part of my genuineness. And I hope that's recognized. And I hope that in that little bit of change that I bring about every single week, if not every single day, that becomes the evidence at some point, even if it's just for one person, and they decide that maybe, oh, I'll take a look at my life. I didn't really want to. It was really painful. It was really difficult, and right. Sometimes you start with forgiveness. That's where I started with, just to forgive yourself, forgive the situation, forgive the characters that were in that story. And it doesn't mean that you just bring them back to the fold, right? But forgive that, let them just go and live their life, and all that grace, right, that your shiner after a while of putting yourself in your old shoes and in your new shoes and setting those goals, right? Recognizing the grace that comes into your life, right? That would be somebody's loss, wouldn't it? It really would be. Yeah. Makes me think of all those amazing people that were just like me in my life, right? They may have looked different. They may have had different coping mechanisms, different taste in music. But in the end, right, they were the same. And if I had known better, if I had started that work a little bit earlier, right, if I had changed a little bit, all it takes is one lesson to come across your path. And sometimes, right, it's all you need to get started. Maybe it's just sitting in here tonight, hanging out with me a few minutes. That's enough for just even one person out there, right? And the next thing you know, you're off living your best life, and you can be the experience too for somebody else, right? Yeah. It's that kind of like pay it forward kind of thing. Okay, you guys, that's my good cheer. We'll see you